So the framework that I used for this maker project was the design learning or the project-based learning framework. This framework begins with empathizing with students and understanding what their strengths are and playing upon those strengths. So it takes a lot of observation and really knowing your students, getting invested in them, and possibly doing some of those interest inventories, observations, and getting involved in their lives. Then you define what your problem is. And that can be anything from, my students need to get outside more, they have a lot of energy to release, or it can be, my students need to practice with their fine motor skills if you're looking at, probably an elementary lens, or even students who may have some limitations. Next is to take that defined problem that you want to work on and start brainstorming some ideas about how you might be solving that problem. Once you have some ideas, you can be building a prototype. And to me, that's anything from mathematical calculations to making a mock-up through some model clay of what you're going to create. And then last but not least, then you are going to test your prototype, and that may be the build, and then see if it answers your problem or your question. I can specifically relate through this process through my maker activity. So I began thinking about how my students really were interested in the 3D printers that our school had. Also just the fact that they always want to work with my fidget toys. That's where I got this idea of building something. In addition to that, our Common Core state standards for ratios and proportions have kids scaling figures up and figures down. So I thought, what better way to do this than through modeling, taking something that's life size and scaling it down and doing the calculations for it. There's also unit conversions within ratios and proportions, which I thought was super helpful because most of the furniture they're going to measure, they're going to think about inches, but when they scale it down, they're really going to have to convert to centimeters. So that, checked off another content standard too. That was super helpful. Once I defined my standards and I found what my students' interests were, then started brainstorming some ideas in terms of low tech and high tech. I knew I wanted to use the 3D printers, but then I also knew myself as a learner wasn't as technology savvy, and that's why I also went with the just generic household objects of just building something by kind of tinkering around, playing around. So that was one of my ideas upon my brainstorming process. With that also went what I was going to use, what software I was going to use, what materials I was going to use, why was I using those materials. I looked into a lot of thickness and depth of these materials so that I could get them as accurate of a conversion as possible. And then I made my prototypes. I made for better lack of terms, my table with its little legs. Pretty cool. Very proud of this. It took me a while, but everything is proportionate, which is fun. And then finally took those measurements as well and 3D printed myself my table. So this is the end product. So something looks like this, came out like this. That was my project. Some of the challenges that I found in this project, number one must have been working with the 3D printer. The software was really mind-boggling and confusing to the point where I kind of gave up. I sought out my two coworkers who are, one is a current project lead the way teacher, the other one is a former project lead the way teacher, and they helped me out and simplified the process by showing me where I could find some templates and kind of modify the data to therefore get my scale factors right and make sure everything was proportionate instead of just printing whatever was online. So yeah, overall, most challenging was definitely working with the 3D printer, trying to make something from scratch and, go through the whole process of creating something in plain space. The template was super helpful. And I heavily relied on my coworkers in order to successfully print. In terms of my prototype or my low tech option, which was the table that I made, that was fairly simple. I wouldn't say it was super challenging. The only thing that was challenging might have been finding materials that were of like the right thickness because I had scaled it down so much. To support my students through these challenges, definitely on the low tech end, I would just say I would for certainly feel more comfortable for the students who choose the low tech option because they feel like I can do a great job questioning them through their decision making process of how they um, build and construct their furniture. Otherwise, I feel like I'm a great resource when it comes to having to um, do the conversions, do the math. I'm definitely more confident in checking their conversions and their scale factors and so on and so forth, that I'm able to support them there, or having taught that skill, they can support each other as well and check each other's work. I would definitely need to work on my 3D printing skills in order to help my students be successful if they want to use a 3D printer and do the high tech option. um, Definitely could no longer be a learner. If I were to do this with my students, I would have to become the expert in terms of 3D printing and how to modify a 3D program. So those are some challenges that I found in this project. So the way in which I connected to George Couroso's growth mindset through this project was just needing to have one, would be my answer. Um, Definitely having a growth mindset with the technology, the 3D printers. I hope I didn't give up. I like to think I didn't give up and that, I still achieved my goal of printing my table. Took some shortcuts and got a lot of help, but still achieved the goal. So that made me feel really good. And I feel like it also therefore connects with Pappert's, ideas of personal mindset and personal growth. I like to think back to, when he was talking about making the croissants, and how he, mentioned that he can't, couldn't pinpoint what it was that it was different from day one to day two, from croissant batch one to croissant batch two, but over time it just clicked and it kind of then felt natural. So since this is my first time 3D printing, it makes sense that it didn't go super well, and it makes sense that I struggled. That's what Pappert kind of taught me, that that's normal and it's okay. But that over time, the more that I do it, it's going to become more comfortable, and it will just be a feeling that I know what I'm doing, almost like how I feel when I'm doing these conversions. It's kind of like second nature, that, knowing automatically how many centimeters are in an inch, the simple process of dividing, something you don't think about, like our students are thinking about, it just comes naturally. And, connecting to these two authors, the fact that I didn't give up, and the fact that, that I see it as a long-term goal to become more comfortable with this technology, knowing that someday it will be comfortable to me, are definitely things in my eyes that I'm proud of. I'm also really proud to consider myself now a maker, because I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be someone who made things, whether it was with or without technology. I always kind of consider myself behind the scenes, doing the math, designing, sketching, measuring, but not exactly executing the construction. So it's changed my mindset in a way that I'm really proud of myself to um, branch out of my comfort zone, try something new, and feel successful and feel really proud of what I've made. So that's what I have to say about my connections to the authors having a growth mindset. So overall, this project really made me aware of how important the maker movement is, especially as I look at my students and I identify with them that, you know, they need opportunities to express their creativity. They need opportunities to just play and just move. Like Papert had said, children in preschool are learning so much because just from playing, and yet we kind of move our students away from play the older they get, when really that's the best way of learning through that constructivist view. So between the readings and this assignment and being in tune with my students, definitely seeing the maker movement have such an impact, or understanding what the impact can be for them as makers, and seeing the need for it, especially with our population of students who, are very high energy, definitely creative individuals, artists, designers, engineers. They all are perfectly capable of these goals, and they have the desire and the drive to do it, I think, because they're always looking for ways in which they can do something. They love being up, they love being around, out of their seats, working. So that's why I think this could be a really good thing for them. Overall, my experience is it was humbling. I thought I was really good with technology until I had to use the 3D printer, and now I realize I know nothing. So definitely a humbling experience, but I'm still really proud of myself for doing it. And I'm also really proud of the way I've branched out and tried new technology in order to put this entire presentation together overall. With that being said, ways in which I hope to use these maker projects. Well, this project specifically, I'd like to use in my next unit on ratios and proportions. Also check out my experimental technology presentation on Sketch and Codesters, two coding programs that I plan on using for the end of my Unit 1 project, which talks about graphing on the coordinate plane and how when people are coding, their objects are moving in a coordinate plane space. So making that real world connection was super important for me to highlight, and I'm so glad I found that connection. So overall, to kind of wrap things up, really, really pleased with this maker movement. I didn't think I could be part of it, but I'm really happy that I was, and I hope to have continued success and that I can impart my joy and success with my students as well for their future projects. Thanks for watching. Bye.